Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you again in today's story. I introduced to you an ancient story. Now I invite you to listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we delve deep, way back, into the cradle of civilization, into the stories that shape humanity's understanding of itself and the cosmos. Picture this. You're standing not on familiar soil, but on the sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. The air is thick, warm, and carries the scent of damp earth from the recent irrigation, mingling with the aroma of baking bread from a nearby village and the distant musky smell of livestock. The sky above you isn't just blue. It's an immense, overwhelming dome, and as twilight approaches, it begins to glitter with a million pinpricks of light, stars so bright they feel close enough to touch. This is where our story begins, under these very stars, where the first whispers of powerful, sky-dwelling beings started to circulate. Now, this isn't your typical fluffy bedtime story where everyone lives happily ever after. We're digging into some pretty heavy concepts, beliefs that defined empires and gods who weren't always, shall we say, the most benevolent. If you were actually there, trying to make sense of thunderclaps as divine arguments or a failed harvest as celestial disapproval, without even a basic meteorological app, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer anxiety, let alone the occasional grumpy hippo in the river. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel more than you know. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a thrill to see this community stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Sumer, a place that hums with a nascent energy. It's a land of firsts, a place where the very concept of city is taking root. Imagine the cities of Uruk, Eridu, not as the sprawling metropolises you know, but as bustling collections of mud brick houses, grand temples reaching tentatively towards the heavens, and marketplaces alive with the chatter of bartering voices. You can almost feel the rough texture of a clay tablet in your hands, freshly inscribed with those curious wedge-shaped marks we call cuneiform. This script, one of humanity's earliest, isn't just for keeping track of barley and sheep, though it does a fine job of that. It's also for capturing prayers, hymns, and epic poems, the stories that bind this society together. And it's here, amidst the daily grind of survival and the first flowering of complex culture, that the Sumerians looked up. They were, by necessity and by nature, meticulous observers of the world around them. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the lifeblood of their civilization, were unpredictable, sometimes bringing fertile silt, other times devastating floods. The sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, they moved in predictable patterns, celestial dances that seemed to influence life on Earth. It was only natural, perhaps, to see powerful forces at play, to imagine beings far greater than themselves orchestrating these cosmic events. You watch as a priest, draped in simple linen, climbs the steps of a ziggurat, a step pyramid that dominates the flat landscape. He's not just going up for the view, though it is spectacular from up there, a panorama of green fields carved out of the ochre desert. He's going to make offerings, to observe, to listen for guidance from those who dwell beyond the veil of the visible. The Sumerians, as you may know, are credited with inventing not just writing and the wheel, but also the rudiments of timekeeping, dividing the day into hours, minutes, and seconds, the system we still use. This precision wasn't just for farming. It was for understanding the divine timetable. They mapped the constellations, naming many as we still know them, and believed these celestial bodies were manifestations of their gods, or at least influenced by them. These weren't distant, abstract deities. The Sumerian pantheon was vast and deeply involved in human affairs. They had gods for everything. Anu, the god of the heavens; Enlil, god of the wind and storms; Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water. And these gods had personalities, desires, and rather inconveniently for the humans involved, quite a few family squabbles. Think of it as the original divine soap opera, playing out on a cosmic scale, with humanity often caught in the middle. The whispers you hear are not yet fully formed narratives of grand alien visitations, not yet. They are more fundamental, more tied to the earth and sky. They are stories of creation, of how the world came to be, of how humanity was formed. You might hear a farmer muttering a prayer to Ninurta, god of agriculture, hoping for good harvest, or a mother soothing a crying child with a tale of Inanna, the powerful goddess of love and war, whose exploits were legendary. These stories were passed down orally for generations, evolving with each telling, before eventually being committed to clay. It's a fascinating process, like watching a river carve its path through a landscape, shaping and being shaped by what it encounters. And speaking of things being committed to clay, one of the more charmingly quirky things about the Sumerians is that some of the oldest written recipes we have are for beer. Yes, beer. They even had a goddess of beer, Ninkasi, and hymns dedicated to her that essentially double as brewing instructions. Clearly, after a long day of inventing civilization and appeasing tempestuous sky gods, a nice cold one was high on the agenda. It makes them feel a bit more relatable, doesn't it? Wrestling with existential dread 1 minute, figuring out the perfect malt-to-water ratio the next. But amidst the hymns to Ninkasi and the meticulous astronomical records, there are other, more enigmatic elements. The Sumerians had a concept called me, pronounced meh, which is fun. Historians still argue whether the Sumerian concept of these divine decrees or essential powers represented abstract principles like kingship or truth, or if they were actual, tangible objects, perhaps even technologies, handed down by the gods to enable civilization. Were they metaphorical blueprints for society, or something more concrete? The tablets speak of these me being held by certain gods, sometimes stolen or transferred, causing cosmic upheaval. It's one of those delightful ambiguities that keeps scholars happily employed and late-night history enthusiasts like us speculating. So you stand there, in the heart of this burgeoning world, the scent of wood smoke and irrigated fields in your nostrils, the murmur of an ancient language just beyond your full comprehension. The stars blaze with an intensity you've never witnessed, untainted by modern light pollution. And in the stories, in the prayers, in the very way these people organize their lives around the cycles of the heavens and the whims of their deities, you sense a profound connection to something beyond the mundane. They believe they are not alone, that powerful beings from the sky are watching, guiding, and sometimes meddling. These are the foundational myths, the first attempts to answer the big questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? And who or what is out there? The stage is being set. The first seeds of a much larger, much stranger story are being sown in the fertile crescent of human imagination and experience. The whispers are growing louder, and so as you stand there under that vast, star-dusted Mesopotamian sky, the general hum of divine presence you've been sensing begins to sharpen, to focus. The whispers coalesce into names, into a collective identity. It's no longer just a vague notion of sky gods, floating about in the ether of belief. No, the Sumerians, your ancient companions in this dusty landscape, start to speak more specifically of the Anunnaki. The term itself, Anunnaki, is etched into countless clay tablets, a testament to their profound importance. Mainstream historical understanding translates it roughly as princely offspring, or those of royal blood, designating a group of powerful deities, the celestial A-listers of their time. Though, of course, other, more dramatic translations like those who from heaven to earth came have gained considerable traction in popular culture, hinting at a more direct, physical arrival. We'll certainly get to that. For now, imagine the impact of this concept solidifying in the collective consciousness. It's like a new, powerful force has not just been recognized but named, and in naming it, humanity gains a framework, however terrifying, to understand the chaotic world. The arrival of the Anunnaki into the Sumerian belief system wasn't necessarily a single, dramatic spaceship landing, complete with lens flares and a booming soundtrack. Though, let's be honest, that would have made for an even better epic poem. It was more of an awakening, a period where these particular gods, powerful and distinct, stepped forward in the mythological narrative to take their primary roles. You can almost feel the shift in the spiritual atmosphere, a sense of awe tinged with a healthy dose of trepidation. These aren't your friendly, fluffy, cloud-dwelling cherubs. The Anunnaki are depicted as beings of immense power, capable of shaping destinies, decreeing fates, and when displeased, unleashing considerable havoc. Think of them as the ultimate cosmic landlords, and humanity is just trying to pay the rent on time and not get evicted. They are a pantheon, a whole divine crew. At the head of this celestial hierarchy, you have Anu, the supreme Father God, residing in the highest heavens, a bit like the distant CEO who rarely visits the branch offices but whose pronouncements are law. Then there's Enlil, god of air, wind, and storms. He's more like the powerful, sometimes short-tempered directly in charge of Earth's affairs, the one who makes the big decisions that directly impact mortals. And you have Enki, also known as Ea in later Akkadian and Babylonian myths, the god of wisdom, magic, and fresh waters, often portrayed as more cunning and, crucially, more sympathetic to the plight of humanity. He's the clever head of R&D, always coming up with ingenious solutions, sometimes even behind the backs of the other divine executives. Their interactions, often fraught with tension and rivalry, form the backbone of many Sumerian myths. It's like a celestial family drama, only instead of fighting over the TV remote, they're squabbling over the fate of entire civilizations. One can only imagine the divine Thanksgiving dinners. Their domain is primarily the heavens, the sky, but their influence is felt everywhere. They meet in a divine assembly, the Ubshuakina, to make decisions, a bit like a cosmic United Nations, but probably with more thunderbolts and less filibustering. The texts describe them as the great gods, often numbering 50, who decree the fates. You see, the Sumerians believed that destiny wasn't just a random occurrence. It was actively decided by these powerful beings. This notion of preordained fate, decreed from on high, would have profoundly shaped the worldview of every man, woman, and child. Imagine trying to plan your week knowing that a council of superpowered sky beings might just decide to, say, rear out a river through your living room on a whim. It adds a certain spice to daily life. Now, for a slightly quirky tidbit from the ancient texts, while many Anunnaki were associated with the heavens, a specific group of them, sometimes also referred to as Anunna, were considered judges in the underworld, the realm of Kur. This is an interesting counterpoint to the pure sky god image. So, not only did they rule from above, but some of them also had jurisdiction over what happened after you shuffled off your mortal coil. Talk about a comprehensive benefits package for divinity, covering all realms from the penthouse suite in the heavens to the basement. This thonic aspect adds another layer to their complexity, suggesting their power wasn't just celestial but permeated all levels of existence. The descent of these gods wasn't always a gentle affair in the myths. Sometimes it was a matter of establishing their dominion, of setting the order of the cosmos. Their presence meant that the world was no longer a formless void or a chaotic mess. It was a structured place, governed by divine laws, however inscrutable those laws might sometimes appear to mortals. You can picture the priests and scribes diligently recording their attributes, their symbols, their genealogies. The crescent moon becomes the symbol of Nanasun, the sun disk for Utu Shamash. These symbols aren't just pretty pictures. They are focal points for worship, reminders of the divine powers that watch over humanity. The Sumerians, practical as ever, weren't just going to offer vague platitudes to the sky. They needed to know who was in charge of what. Oh, the crops are failing. Right, that's Ninurta's department. Better up the offerings at his temple, and maybe someone remind him we exist down here. Scholars continue to debate the precise nature and evolution of the Anunnaki within the Mesopotamian belief system. Were they initially distinct local deities who were later grouped together into a collective pantheon as city-states merged and interacted? Or was the concept of a unified group of powerful sky gods present from the very earliest stages of Sumerian religious thought? It's one of those fascinating chicken or egg scenarios of theology. The texts we have are often fragments, copies of copies, sometimes from periods hundreds or even thousands of years apart, making it a complex puzzle to piece together their original roles and how they might have changed over time. But for you, standing in this ancient world, the effect is palpable. The Anunnaki are real. They are the explanation for the movement of the stars, for the changing seasons, for the life-giving floods and the devastating droughts. Their stories are told and retold, shaping the understanding of justice, power, and humanity's place in the grand scheme of things. They are not abstract philosophical concepts. They are active participants, powerful personalities whose moods and decisions have direct and immediate consequences. The sky isn't empty anymore. It's populated. It's watching. And it has expectations. The age of the Anunnaki as the primary divine players has truly begun. The air in ancient Sumer, already thick with the scent of river silt and wood smoke, now carries an undercurrent of divine intention. The Anunnaki, these powerful beings you've come to know, aren't just celestial voyeurs, content to watch humanity fumble its way through existence from their lofty skyboxes. Oh no, they have plans. Big plans. And humanity, it turns out, is a key ingredient. As you listen to the epic poems recited in the flickering torchlight of a temple courtyard, or perhaps overhear a hushed conversation between priests, a recurring theme begins to emerge: the creation of humankind. But this isn't a story of spontaneous generation or a happy accident of cosmic evolution. This is a story of deliberate design, of a divine council making a conscious decision to bring forth a new kind of being. The most famous of these creation narratives comes to us from texts like the Atrahasis epic and Enuma Elish. Though the latter is more of a cosmic creation story, humanity's creation is a significant subplot. Imagine yourself as a scribe, carefully pressing your reed stylus into a damp clay tablet, recording these sacred words. The gods, the Anunnaki, are facing a problem. The junior gods, the Ijajai, have been tasked with all the hard labor of maintaining the cosmos, digging canals, building temples, basically doing all the divine grunt work. And frankly, they're tired of it. They go on strike. Yes, you heard that right, a divine labor dispute. They burn their tools, they surround Enlil's great temple, and they demand an end to their toil. It's a celestial walkout of epic proportions. One can almost picture the picket signs. No more canal digging. Unfair cosmic conditions. Faced with this rebellion, the senior Anunnaki are in a bind. The work needs to be done, but their workforce is refusing to cooperate. This is where Enki, the clever, problem-solving god, steps in. He proposes a solution. Let's create a new being, a lesser being, to take over the toil of the gods. Let's fashion a worker. And who is this worker to be? Humanity. You, me, all of us, in this mythological framework, are conceived as a solution to a divine labor shortage. It's not the most flattering origin story, perhaps. Congratulations, you were created to be a cosmic shovel pusher. But it's certainly a practical one from the gods' perspective. The process of creation itself is described with fascinating and sometimes slightly unsettling detail. The primary material? Clay. The gods, led by Enki and the mother goddess, often Nintu or Mami, mix clay from the Abzu, Enki's domain of fresh subterranean waters, with the blood of a sacrificed god. Yes, divine blood. In the Atrahasis, it's the blood of Geshtui, a god who had intelligence, suggesting that humanity would inherit not just a physical form but also a spark of divine understanding, albeit a lesser one. The mother goddess then nips off 14 pieces of this special clay, 7 for males and 7 for females, and birth goddesses assist in bringing these first humans into existence. The purpose is explicitly stated: let him bear the yoke, the work of Enlil. Let man carry the load of the gods. No ambiguity there. You are created to serve, to lighten the burden of your celestial masters. This mankind from clay motif is, of course, a mainstream historical fact in terms of its presence in Mesopotamian mythology, and it resonates across many other ancient cultures too, from the biblical Adam formed from dust to figures in Greek and Egyptian lore. It's a powerful symbol of our connection to the earth, of being literally fashioned from the stuff of the planet. But in the Sumerian context, it's also a constant reminder of humanity's subordinate role. You are not an equal partner in this cosmic dance. You are a divinely engineered biological machine designed for labor. It's a rather humbling thought, isn't it? Imagine going through your day knowing your ultimate purpose, as decreed by the beings who literally made you, was to dig ditches so they didn't have to. Makes complaining about your office job seem a bit trite. Now, for a quirky tidbit related to creation and early humanity. Some interpretations of these texts, particularly from more fringe perspectives, latch onto the idea that this mixing process wasn't just symbolic. They propose it was a literal genetic engineering event, with the Anunnaki, as advanced beings manipulating pre-existing hominid DNA and adding their own to create Homo sapiens. The blood of a god becomes a metaphor for alien DNA. This is where the ancient astronaut theories really start to warm up, seeing these myths not as metaphors for the human condition, but as garbled accounts of scientific procedures. While mainstream archaeology and genetics don't support this, it's a persistent and popular interpretation, adding a sci-fi gloss to these ancient tales. It does make you wonder, though, if you're Enki trying to explain DNA splicing to a Bronze Age audience, mixing clay and divine blood might be a pretty good way to get the point across. The creation of humanity wasn't a one-and-done deal either. According to some texts, the first attempts weren't entirely successful. There are hints of flawed prototypes, beings created with defects, perhaps reflecting the trial-and-error process of divine experimentation, or perhaps serving as etiological myths to explain various human conditions. Historians still argue whether these accounts of flawed early humans reflect actual social anxieties about birth defects and disabilities within Sumerian society, or if they are purely literary devices to emphasize the skill of the gods in eventually getting it right. It's a sober reminder that even in these grand cosmic narratives, the everyday human concerns and observations find their way in. So you are now born into this world, not through a gentle, loving genesis, but as a solution to a divine problem. Your purpose is clear: to work, to maintain the canals that irrigate the fields, to build the temples that house the gods, to provide the sacrifices that feed them. It's a life of toil, certainly, but it's also a life with a defined place in the cosmic order. You are not adrift in a meaningless universe. You are a vital, if subordinate, part of a divinely ordained system. And while the Anunnaki may seem like harsh taskmasters, there's also a sense that in creating humanity, they've taken on a certain responsibility. After all, you don't design a complex piece of machinery and then just walk away, do you? Especially not if it's meant to do all your heavy lifting. The relationship is set, gods as masters, humans as servants. But as with any relationship, it's bound to get complicated, so you're here. Fashioned from clay and divine essence, your primary directive hardwired into your very being, to serve the Anunnaki, to take the yoke of the gods. But what exactly does this service entail? What is the crucial, back-breaking work that the junior gods themselves rebelled against, prompting your very creation? As you look around this Mesopotamian world, you see the obvious tasks, the endless labor of agriculture, digging and maintaining the intricate network of irrigation canals that turn arid land into fertile fields, building the monumental ziggurats and temples that pierce the sky, and providing the daily offerings of food and drink to sustain your celestial overseers. These are all vital, no doubt. But according to some interpretations, particularly those championed by writers like Zacharias Sitchin, there was one specific, overarching task that trumped all others, the true reason for humanity's engineered existence: mining gold. Yes, gold. That gleaming, incorruptible metal that has captivated human desire for millennia. But in this narrative, it's not for adorning palaces or crafting pretty jewelry for earthly kings, not primarily anyway. The Anunnaki, according to this theory, needed gold for a far more critical, almost desperate purpose. Sitchin's interpretation of the cuneiform text suggests that their home planet, Nibiru, which we'll get to later, don't you worry, was facing an atmospheric crisis. Its protective atmosphere was dwindling, and the only solution the divine engineers supposedly figured was to suspend fine gold particles in their upper atmosphere to reflect radiation and heat, a kind of planetary sunscreen. It sounds like something out of a particularly ambitious sci-fi novel, doesn't it? Earth, the Anunnaki's interstellar gold mine and sunblock emporium. Imagine the scene. The Anunnaki arrive on Earth, survey its resources, and identify vast gold deposits, perhaps in southern Africa, as Sitchin proposed, or in other regions. The initial mining operations would have been carried out by the Anunnaki themselves, or the Igigi, those poor, overworked junior deities. But the scale of the operation, the sheer quantity of gold required, was immense. It was grueling, soul-destroying work, even for gods. And so, cue humanity. You and countless generations after you are now tasked with this monumental, back-breaking labor. You trudge into the darkness of mines, chipping away at rock, hauling heavy loads, all for a purpose you likely don't fully comprehend, only knowing that it is the will of the powerful beings who created you and control your world. The sweat on your brow, the dust in your lungs, the ache in your muscles, it's all for the sake of saving a distant, alien world. The tablets do speak of humanity's toil, of the hardship of their lives. Phrases like, "man bears the load of the gods," are common. While mainstream archaeology and history interpret this toil in the context of earthly agriculture and temple building to appease local deities, the ancient astronaut theorists see a clear reference to this specific, large-scale mining operation. They point to vague references to metals and ores in the texts, and to the Anunnaki's association with specific regions. It's a compelling, if highly controversial, rereading of the ancient narratives. You can almost hear the rhythmic clanging of pickaxes echoing from the depths of the earth, a soundtrack to humanity's early existence, a testament to their service. One mainstream historical fact that gets woven into this narrative is that ancient peoples, including those in and around Mesopotamia, were indeed mining various metals, including gold, from very early periods. Gold artifacts have been found in royal tombs dating back to the early dynastic period of Sumer, like those at Uar, showcasing sophisticated goldsmithing techniques. So the activity of gold mining, and its high value, are historically attested. The leap is in attributing the primary motivation for this to an extraterrestrial need for atmospheric repair. It's a bit like finding an ancient recipe for bread and concluding it was to feed a colony of homesick aliens who missed their native grain. Possible. Perhaps. Provable from the text alone. That's where the debate rages. Now for a quirky tidbit that ties into this idea of toil and hardship, though not directly gold-related. Among the many burdens of early civilized life was, apparently, a lot of brick-making. Sumerian construction relied heavily on mud bricks, and making them was a laborious, repetitive task. There's a Sumerian proverb that goes something like, "The man who has silver is happy, the man who has barley is happy, but the man who has nothing at all can still sleep." It's a surprisingly philosophical take on material wealth versus peace of mind, and perhaps a subtle commentary on the endless work. Maybe the guy with nothing was the only one not roped into making bricks, or, in the more exotic theories, hauling gold or all day. He probably wasn't surviving long, mind you, but he'd get a good night's sleep first. The conditions of this alleged gold mining operation would have been brutal. Imagine pre-industrial mining techniques, the danger of cave-ins, the lack of proper ventilation, the sheer physical exertion. It would have been a life of immense suffering, true toil and tears existence. This hardship, this suffering, is actually a key element in the myths. The gods, in creating humanity, weren't looking for happy, fulfilled individuals. They were looking for a workforce. And if that workforce suffered, well, that was apparently an acceptable byproduct. It's a rather bleak view of our origins, portraying humanity as little more than divinely created slaves, born to suffer for the benefit of others. Historians still argue whether the detailed descriptions of the gods' activities, including their need for resources and their organization of labor, are purely mythological allegories for human societal structures and resource management, or if they contain, as some suggest, echoes of actual historical events or advanced technological understanding garbled over time. For instance, when texts describe the gods setting up the brick mold for the land, is this a metaphor for establishing civilization or a more literal instruction? The ambiguity is fertile ground for endless speculation. So, as you exist in this world, under the watchful eyes of the Anunnaki, the gold you might see adorning a temple statue or a king's headdress takes on a new, deeper significance if you subscribe to this particular narrative thread. It's not just a symbol of wealth or power. It's a reminder of your purpose, of the very reason your ancestors were brought into being. Every glint of gold is a tiny piece of a distant planet's salvation, bought with the sweat and tears of Earth's first human laborers. The weight of this metal is more than just its physical density. It's the weight of a cosmic obligation, a burden passed down through generations. Whether this specific interpretation of golden toil is accurate or a modern reimagining, the underlying theme of humanity created for labor, for service to higher powers, remains a powerful and unsettling core of the Anunnaki story. Amidst this grand cosmic drama of creation, toil, and the alleged interstellar gold rush, a fascinating and crucial dynamic begins to play out among the Anunnaki themselves. Not all the gods, it seems, share the same views on humanity, nor the same approach to managing their newly created workforce. As you navigate this world, listening to the myths and observing the rituals, you become aware of a fundamental tension, a divine disagreement that will have profound consequences for humankind. This is the story of two powerful half-brothers, sons of the supreme god Anu Enki, the wise and often compassionate god of waters and crafts, and Enlil, the formidable god of air and storms, the chief executive of Earth. Their rivalry, their differing philosophies, become a central thread in the Anunnaki saga, casting them in roles that will echo through countless subsequent mythologies. The stern, law-giving deity versus the more approachable, sometimes rebellious, advocate for humanity. Enlil, as the appointed commander on Earth, is often portrayed as the stricter of the two. He's concerned with order, with a proper functioning of the divine plan, and with ensuring humanity fulfills its designated role, which, as we've established, primarily involves a lot of hard work and not asking too many questions. He's the one who gets infuriated by humanity's noise, their perceived imperfections, and their tendency to, multiply a bit too enthusiastically. Think of him as the cosmic middle manager who is constantly stressed about production quotas and worker discipline. He's not necessarily evil in the traditional sense, but he is often harsh, demanding, and quick to anger when his decrees are challenged or when humanity steps out of line. If the Anunnaki were running a company, Enlil would be the one sending sternly worded memos about proper use of the divine coffee machine and the importance of meeting quarterly gold extraction targets. On the other hand, you have Enki or Ea, as he's known in Akkadian texts. He's the god of wisdom, fresh water, the Abzu, his domain, is the source of life-giving waters, magic, arts, and crafts. Crucially, he's also the chief scientist, the divine engineer who played a pivotal role in the actual creation of humanity. Perhaps because of this intimate involvement in our genesis, or perhaps due to his inherent nature, Enki often displays a more sympathetic, even protective attitude towards his creation. He's the clever one, the one who finds solutions, sometimes through cunning and trickery, often to mitigate the harsher decrees of his brother Enlil. If Enlil is the enforcer, Enki is the troubleshooter, the one who quietly fixes things or finds loopholes in the divine regulations. You can almost imagine him rolling his eyes, if gods have eyes to roll in quite that way, at some of Enlil's more draconian pronouncements. Honestly, Enlil, another flood? Can't we just try a strongly worded warning this time? Their clashes are legendary. One of the most significant early points of contention, according to some interpretations of the text, was the very nature and capacity of the newly created humans. Was humanity too capable? Too intelligent? Remember that god Geshte, who had intelligence, whose blood was mixed with the clay? Enki was instrumental in that. Did he intentionally give humanity a greater spark of understanding, a capacity for independent thought and growth, than Enlil was comfortable with? Some narratives suggest that Enlil was perpetually wary of humans becoming too much like the gods, too powerful, too knowledgeable. This is a classic trope. The creator fearing his creation, the master worried about the servant who learns too quickly. A mainstream historical fact that supports this characterization of Enki as a benefactor of humanity is his role in giving humans those divine powers or decrees we touched upon earlier. In the myth of Inanna and Enki, the goddess Inanna travels to Enki's temple in Eridu, and through a series of rather comical drinking contests, Enki, it seems, couldn't hold his divine liquor as well as Inanna. She manages to obtain many of the me from him, including those essential for establishing civilization like kingship, priesthood, justice, and various crafts. Enki, upon sobering up, is initially regretful but ultimately allows Inanna to take these gifts to her city of Uruk, effectively disseminating the tools of civilization to humanity. While Enlil is often about maintaining control and boundaries, Enki is frequently the one who enables human progress, sometimes even against the wishes of his more conservative brother. Now for a quirky and somewhat controversial tidbit that some proponents of ancient astronaut theories find particularly significant. They often identify Enki with figures like the serpent in the Garden of Eden. In this reinterpretation, Enki is the one who wishes to enlighten humanity to give them knowledge, symbolized by the fruit of the tree of knowledge, while Enlil, sometimes equated with the biblical God of the Old Testament in these theories, wants to keep them ignorant and servile. The serpent thus becomes not a tempter to evil, but a liberator, an agent of Enki trying to help humanity break free from their imposed limitations. This is, of course, a radical rereading that flips traditional interpretations on their head, but it highlights the perception of Enki as humanity's secret ally within the Anunnaki Council. It's a bit like discovering your stern boss has a much cooler, more understanding twin brother working in the R&D department who occasionally slips you cheat codes for life. The tension between these two powerful deities creates a constant underlying friction. You can imagine the human priests and kings trying to navigate this divine sibling rivalry, unsure which god to appease at any given moment. Do you follow Enlil's strict rules to the letter, hoping for stability and order? Or do you look to Enki for wisdom, innovation, and perhaps a bit of divine leniency? Historians still argue whether the portrayal of Enki and Enlil's relationship in the myths reflects actual political rivalries between their respective cult centers, Eridu for Enki, Nippur for Enlil, or if it represents a more fundamental philosophical exploration of contrasting principles necessary for cosmic and social balance, order versus creativity, law versus compassion. Perhaps it's a bit of both. This dynamic between Enki and Enlil is more than just a divine soap opera. It's a reflection of the complexities inherent in the human-divine relationship as the Sumerians perceived it. The gods are not monolithic. They have their own agendas, their own personalities. And humanity, caught in the middle, learns to survive and even thrive by understanding these divine politics. Enki's advocacy, however subtle or overt, provides a glimmer of hope, a sense that not all the gods view humanity merely as expendable tools. He represents the possibility of a more nuanced relationship, one where humanity, despite its created purpose, might yet find a path towards greater understanding and perhaps, eventually, a degree of autonomy. The cosmic stage is set not just for human toil, but for divine intrigue that will directly shape your destiny. The tension between Enlil's stern view of humanity and Enki's more sympathetic stance isn't just a matter of philosophical debate within the divine council. It eventually boils over into a cataclysmic event that threatens to wipe humanity off the face of the earth. As you listen to the chilling recitations of the Atrahasis epic, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains a famous flood account, you realize that the Anunnaki, or at least a powerful faction among them led by Enlil, decide that humanity has become too much trouble. Their noise, their sheer numbers, their humanness, it all becomes unbearable to the great god of wind and storm. And so a decision is made in the divine assembly to unleash a great flood, a deluge of epic proportions to eradicate mankind. Imagine the scene in that celestial boardroom. Enlil, perhaps pacing, exasperated, makes his case. They're too loud. I can't get any divine rest. Their clamor disrupts the very heavens, and they just keep multiplying. We made them to do the work, not to become a nuisance. Other gods might murmur in agreement, perhaps equally annoyed or simply unwilling to cross the powerful Enlil. The decree is passed. A wall of water will cleanse the earth, returning it to a state of primordial silence. It's a chilling decision, a divine pest control measure on a planetary scale. You and all of fledgling humanity are slated for extermination. It's a stark reminder of your precarious position in this cosmic order. One minute you're toiling for the gods, the next you're on their divine hit list. Talk about a tough performance review. But remember Enki, the clever, often compassionate god of wisdom, humanity's secret advocate? He's part of this divine council, and he's sworn an oath with the other gods not to reveal the plan to mortals. This puts him in a terrible bind. He cannot directly warn humanity, but his conscience, or perhaps his fondness for his creation, won't let him stand idly by and watch them all perish. So Enki, in a classic display of cunning that would make any lawyer proud, devises a loophole. He goes to the reed hut of a righteous man, a king or priest named Atrahasis, meaning exceedingly wise, in one version, Utnapishtim in the Gilgamesh epic. Enki doesn't speak to Atrahasis directly. No, that would break his oath. Instead, he speaks to the reed wall of the hut, knowing full well that Atrahasis is on the other side and will overhear. You can almost picture Enki, a conspiratorial whisper in his divine voice, addressing the inanimate wall. Reed hut, wall, wall. Reed hut, listen. Wall, pay attention. Demolish your house, build a boat. Abandon possessions, save your life. The boat you build, let its dimensions be measured. He provides specific instructions for building a massive ark, a vessel to preserve human and animal life from the coming deluge. It's a brilliant workaround, a masterclass in sticking to the letter of the law while completely subverting its spirit. One wonders if the other gods ever figured out how Atrahasis got the memo. Perhaps Enki just shrugged and said, "Smart reeds, those." Very intuitive, Atrahasis, understandably, takes this rather unusual architectural advice from his wall very seriously. He builds the boat, gathers his family, craftsmen, and animals of all kinds, and seals himself inside just as the floodwaters begin to rise. The description of the flood in these ancient texts is terrifying and powerful. Storms rage, the waters surge, and the world is plunged into darkness and chaos. Even the gods themselves are said to be frightened by the destructive power they have unleashed. Ishtar, another name for Inanna, weeps for her people, regretting the decision. How can I have ordered a great destruction? How can I have ordered a great destruction of my people? My people, like fish, fill the sea. It seems some of the Anunnaki had a moment of buyer's remorse, realizing the extent of the devastation. This flood narrative, of course, is a well-known mainstream historical fact in terms of its existence within Mesopotamian literature, and it has striking parallels with the biblical story of Noah and flood myths found in countless other cultures around the world. The sheer ubiquity of global deluge myths is fascinating. Historians still argue whether these widespread flood stories are independent inventions reflecting common human experiences with local catastrophic floods, or if they might point to a shared, ancient memory of a truly massive, perhaps singular, prehistoric inundation, maybe linked to the end of the last ice age and rising sea levels. The debate over a Black Sea flood theory, for example, continues to generate discussion. After 7 days or 6 days and 7 nights in the Gilgamesh version, the floodwaters begin to subside. Atrahasis, or Utnapishtim, sends out birds, a dove, a swallow, a raven to see if land has reappeared. When the raven doesn't return, he knows it's safe to emerge. He opens the ark and makes a sacrifice, the sweet savor of which reaches the heavens. The gods, apparently quite hungry after the ordeal, perhaps divine catering services were also shut down by the flood, gather around the offering. It's a rather human portrayal of these powerful beings, brought low by hunger. Enlil, however, is furious when he discovers that humanity has survived. Who disobeyed the council? Who let them live? His rage is palpable. This is where Enki finally steps forward and confesses his ruse, arguing for humanity's right to exist, perhaps pointing out their usefulness and the fact that, well, someone needs to make the sacrifices to feed the gods. A compromise is eventually reached. Humanity will be allowed to continue, but measures are put in place to control their population and perhaps limit their lifespan or make childbirth more arduous, a divine recalibration to prevent them from becoming a nuisance again. The Great Flood serves as a terrifying reset button, a stark demonstration of Anunnaki power, but also, thanks to Enki, a testament to humanity's resilience and the possibility of divine compassion, or at least enlightened self-interest. A quirky tidbit related to divine anger and floods. In some versions of the myth, one of the reasons Enlil is so annoyed by humanity is simply their noise. It's not necessarily wickedness or sin, just the general hubbub of a growing population. It makes you wonder what Enlil would think of a modern city, with its traffic, construction, and ceaseless activity. He'd probably demand a global noise cancellation edict, punishable by, well, another flood. It's a comically relatable divine pet peeve, the grumpy landlord upstairs banging on the floor because the tenants are having too much fun. So you've survived the deluge, thanks to a clever god and a very sturdy boat. The world is washed clean, a fresh start, but also a world forever marked by the memory of divine wrath and the fragility of existence. The relationship with the Anunnaki is now even more complex. They are creators, destroyers, and in the form of Enki, even saviors. This event cements Enki's role as a protector and benefactor, but also underscores Enlil's capacity for terrifying judgment. The future of humanity will continue to unfold under the shadow, a constant awareness of the power that lurks beyond the sky, a power that giveth and can, most definitely, taketh away. Having narrowly escaped annihilation by a divinely orchestrated flood, humanity, now chastened and considerably reduced in number, finds itself on a remade earth. The Anunnaki, perhaps having learned a lesson themselves about the consequences of unchecked destructive impulses, or at least about the inconvenience of having no one to make sacrifices to them, seem to shift their approach. The era of near-total extermination gives way to an era of more structured governance. If humanity is to persist and continue its service, there needs to be order, there need to be rules. And so, the focus shifts to establishing the framework of civilization, to laying down the laws and societal structures that will guide human existence. This is where the concept of the tablets of destiny becomes paramount. Imagine these aren't just metaphorical tablets, but perhaps actual, tangible objects of immense power, divine decrees that codify the fate of the cosmos, the functions of the gods, and the proper order of human society. In Mesopotamian mythology, the Tablet of Destinies, singular or plural, Upsamadu in Akkadian, was a legitimate mythological artifact, a clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform, which conferred upon its possessor the supreme authority to rule the universe, effectively making them the head of the divine council. The control of this tablet was a big deal, a sort of cosmic superweapon or ultimate CEO badge. Its possession was a major plot point in several myths, indicating just how central the idea of decreed fate and divine law was to the Sumerian and later Mesopotamian worldview. It wasn't a world of random chance. It was a world governed, managed, and micromanaged from on high. Following the Great Flood, Enlil, despite his earlier fury, reasserts his authority, or perhaps has it reconfirmed by Anu, the supreme Skyfather. With the Tablet of Destinies presumably secure in his possession, he, along with the other Anunnaki, sets about reorganizing the world. This involves more than just re-establishing agricultural cycles and repopulating the land. It means defining the very institutions that will characterize civilization: kingship, priesthood, legal systems, social hierarchies, and even the proper rituals for worship. You can envision the divine assembly hard at work, not unlike a constitutional convention, hammering out the bylaws for Planet Earth version 2.0. Right, item 7 on the agenda: who gets to wear the pointy hats and were the approved incantations for a bountiful barley harvest. The concept of kingship lowered from heaven is a key element here. The Sumerian king list, a fascinating ancient document, claims that rulership, the institution of monarchy, was not a human invention but a gift from the gods, passed down from on high. It lists a succession of kings, both before and after the flood, and the cities that held dominion. This divine anointing of kings gave them immense authority, but also immense responsibility. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, tasked with upholding divine law, ensuring justice, and maintaining the temples. If a king failed in these duties, it wasn't just a political failure. It was a cosmic one that could bring disaster upon the land. It's a heavy crown to wear, knowing your performance is being judged not just by your subjects, but by counsel of easily displeased sky gods. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from our earlier imaginary Egyptian jaunt? Perhaps these kings needed something similar, but for divine disapproval, the establishment of laws was crucial. While the famous Code of Hammurabi from Babylon circa 1754 BCE is perhaps the most well-known ancient Mesopotamian law code, it was certainly not the first. Earlier codes, like the Code of Ur-Nammu Sumer circa 2100 to 2050 BCE, predate it by centuries. These codes covered a wide range of civil and criminal matters, from property rights and trade regulations to family law and assault. The gods, particularly deities associated with justice like Utu Shamash, the sun god, were seen as the ultimate source and guarantors of these laws. So, when you paid a fine for letting your ox gore someone, you weren't just settling a dispute with your neighbor, you were upholding a divinely sanctioned order. It adds a certain gravitas to even the most mundane legal proceedings. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some of these ancient laws are remarkably specific and, to our modern sensibilities, rather peculiar. For instance, the Code of Hammurabi includes laws about shoddy boat building, relevant, perhaps, given the recent flood experience, and even malpractice by physicians. If a doctor performed a major operation with a bronze lancet and caused the patient's death, or opened an abscess and destroyed the eye, the doctor's hands were to be cut off. It certainly incentivized careful medical practice. One wonders if Enki, the god of crafts and wisdom, had a hand in drafting the clauses related to professional standards. If you're going to build a human or fix one, do it properly or else. The Anunnaki didn't just hand down laws and then retreat to their celestial palaces. They were also seen as establishing the various arts of civilization. Different gods were patrons of different skills. Nisaba for writing and scribes, Ninurta for agriculture, Enki for crafts and magic. The cities themselves, with their temples, granaries, and irrigation systems, were considered divine projects. The layout of a city, the rituals performed within its walls, all were partika of this divinely ordained plan. You are living in a world that is, in essence, a carefully constructed, divinely managed estate. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamian concept of divine law and order, as embodied in things like the Tablet of Destinies and the institution of kingship, was primarily a top-down imposition by a ruling priestly and royal class to legitimize their power, or if it genuinely reflected a deeply held popular belief in a divinely structured cosmos to which all, even kings, were subject. It's likely a complex interplay of both. Power always seeks legitimacy, and what better legitimacy than a direct mandate from the gods who control fate itself? So, in this post-Diluvian world, life is perhaps more predictable, more ordered, but also more tightly controlled. The Tablets of Destiny, whether a literal artifact or a powerful symbol, represent the intricate web of rules, responsibilities, and fates that govern your existence. The wild, somewhat chaotic early days of humanity are over. Now you are citizens of a divinely sanctioned system. Your kings rule by divine right, your priests interpret divine will, and your laws reflect divine justice. The Anunnaki have moved from being simply creators and taskmasters to being cosmic legislators and societal architects. The framework for civilization, as they intend it, is now firmly in place. But with such order comes the question, what is the ultimate purpose of this divinely managed society? Is it merely to ensure a more efficient supply of sacrifices, or is there something more to their grand design? With a new world order established, laws decreed, and kingship firmly planted as the link between the divine and the mortal, you see the physical landscape of Mesopotamia begin to transform in even more dramatic ways. All across the plains of Sumer, Akkad, and later Babylonia and Assyria, monumental structures start to pierce the flat horizon, the ziggurats. These are not just impressive buildings. They are potent symbols of the Anunnaki's presence and power and humanity's tireless efforts to connect with, or perhaps simply appease, their celestial overlords. As you gaze up at the towering ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana, or the legendary, though now long gone, Enki in Babylon, thought by some to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, you can't help but wonder about their true purpose. Were they merely temples, places of worship and sacrifice? Or were they something more? A ziggurat, for those unfamiliar, is a massive step pyramid, usually built with a core of mud brick and faced with more durable baked bricks. They had a series of terraced levels, with a shrine or temple at the very summit. Access to these upper levels was typically via a series of ramps or staircases. Mainstream historical consensus views them primarily as religious structures, the earthly dwellings of the city's patron deity. The temple at the top was considered the god's home, and the priests would perform rituals there, make offerings, and perhaps conduct astronomical observations, which were deeply intertwined with religious practice. The ziggurat elevated the god, both literally and symbolically, above the mundane world of mortals, bringing them closer to the heavens. It was a focal point for the community, a constant reminder of the divine presence that governed their lives. You can imagine the priests, clad in their ceremonial robes, making their slow, solemn ascent, carrying offerings of food, drink, and incense, disappearing into the sacred space at the summit, a place few ordinary mortals would ever enter. The construction of these ziggurats was a colossal undertaking, requiring immense resources and a highly organized labor force. Think of the sheer number of bricks that had to be made, transported, and laid. This was humanity fulfilling its purpose, toiling for the gods, not just in the fields or mines, but in creating these magnificent divine residences. The dedication inscriptions of kings often boasted of their efforts in building or restoring these sacred structures, portraying it as a pious duty and a means of securing divine favor. It was a group project of epic proportions, a way for the entire community to participate, directly or indirectly, in honoring their gods. The joke's on them, though, if the gods are just using the top level as a really fancy sunbathing deck. But were they just temples? This is where alternative interpretations, particularly those fueled by ancient astronaut theories, offer a more intriguing, if speculative, perspective. What if these stairways to heaven, as they've sometimes been called, were more than just symbolic connections? What if they serve a more practical, technological purpose for the Anunnaki? Some theorists propose that ziggurats might have been landing platforms for Anunnaki spacecraft, or perhaps communication towers for contacting their home world, or even energy sources of some kind. The idea of a structure whose top may reach unto heaven, as the Tower of Babel story describes, takes on a very different meaning if you imagine that heaven is not just a metaphorical celestial realm, but a literal place in the sky from which beings in flying vehicles might descend. This interpretation often latches onto the term Shem, used in some biblical and related texts, often translated as name or renown. Ancient astronaut theorists like Sitchin argued that Shem could also mean a skyborne vehicle, a rocket or shuttle. So when the Tower of Babel was built to make a name Shem for ourselves, they weren't just seeking fame. They were allegedly trying to build their own launch tower or vehicle, mimicking the Anunnaki. This, in turn, provoked the divine wrath, not because of human hubris in a religious sense, but because humans were attempting to acquire forbidden technology. It's a radical reinterpretation, but it does provide a certain narrative coherence if we're already on board with the idea of flesh and blood Anunnakis zipping around in spacecraft. The ziggurat then becomes a divine airport terminal, complete with a VIP lounge at the top for the god in question. Flight ANU-001 from Nibiru, now arriving at Gate 1, Ziggurat of UR. A quirky tidbit that adds a little flavor to the ziggurat story. The Anunnaki ziggurat in Babylon, dedicated to Marduk, who rose to prominence as the chief god of Babylon, absorbing many of Enlil's attributes, was said to have been truly enormous. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Babylon in the 5th century BCE, though the ziggurat had likely been damaged by then, described it in impressive terms. While its exact dimensions are debated, some scholars estimate its base was around 91 meters or 300 feet square, and it might have reached a similar height. That's a serious piece of ancient engineering. Unfortunately, only its foundations remain today, leaving much to the imagination and, of course, to speculative reconstruction. It's a shame we don't have TripAdvisor reviews from the time. Anunnaki, great views, but the climb is a killer. Sacrifices a bit too smoky. 3 out of 5 stars. The debate among scholars isn't just about ancient astronauts versus traditional religious interpretations. Even within mainstream archaeology, there are discussions. Historians still argue whether the primary function of the ziggurat was to serve as the god's literal dwelling, a place for the deity to reside when visiting Earth, or if it was more a symbolic representation of the cosmic mountain, a sacred link between heaven and earth, with the rituals performed there having a more profound cosmological significance than just feeding the god. The truth is likely a complex blend of these ideas. For the average Sumerian or Babylonian, it was undoubtedly the house of their god, a place of awe and reverence. For the priests, it was the center of their religious and often political power. For the kings, it was a testament to their piety and authority. So, as you stand in the shadow of one of these immense structures, feeling the sun-baked bricks beneath your feet, you are confronted with a powerful enigma. Is this a testament to human faith and devotion, a monumental effort to reach out to the divine through prayer and sacrifice? Is it a symbol of the cosmic order imposed by powerful sky gods, their earthly headquarters from which they manage their human workforce? Or, as some would have you believe, is it a relic of an even stranger past, a landing pad or a communication hub for beings not of this world? The ziggurats stand silent, their secrets weathered by millennia of wind and sand, inviting you to choose your own interpretation. But whatever their ultimate purpose, they are undeniable evidence of a society profoundly shaped by its relationship with the beings they call the Anunnaki. They are stairways, but to precisely where or what remains a tantalizing question as we delve deeper into the Anunnaki narrative, particularly its more modern and controversial interpretations. We inevitably encounter the work of Zecharia Sitchin. You simply can't discuss the Anunnaki in popular culture today without addressing his theories, which have profoundly shaped, for better or worse, how many people understand these ancient Sumerian deities. Sitchin, an author who wrote extensively on ancient astronauts, took the cuneiform texts, particularly those concerning the Anunnaki, and proposed a startling, detailed, and highly specific scenario, that the Anunnaki were not gods in the spiritual sense, nor simply mythological figures, but actual flesh and blood extraterrestrials from a yet undiscovered planet in our own solar system. He called this planet Nibiru. Imagine Sitchin poring over reproductions of clay tablets, not with the eye of a traditional historian or linguist focused on mythology and societal structures, but with the mindset of someone looking for clues to a lost technological past, a hidden history of alien intervention. He proposed that Nibiru, which he equated with a crossing point or planet of the crossing mentioned in some Mesopotamian text, though mainstream scholarship generally identifies this with Jupiter or Marduk, the deity, was on a vast, elliptical orbit, taking approximately 3,600 Earth years to complete one journey around our Sun. It was during its periodic passages through the inner solar system, Sitchin claimed, that the inhabitants of Nibiru, the Anunnaki, would travel to Earth. This isn't just a vague idea of aliens came here. Sitchin laid out a whole cosmic backstory. According to his interpretations, Nibiru was facing an environmental catastrophe, its atmosphere slowly eroding. Remember that gold humanity was supposedly mining? This was the Nibiruan solution, to create a shield of gold particles in their upper atmosphere to prevent further atmospheric loss. The Anunnaki, therefore, came to Earth as miners, explorers, and eventually colonizers, seeking this precious metal. Earth was, in essence, their El Dorado, their intergalactic Klondike. You can picture their long-haul spacecraft, perhaps looking a bit worn from the 3,600-year commute, finally approaching our blue planet with a sigh of relief and a mission briefing. All right, team, find the gold and try not to uplift the local fauna too much this time. Remember what happened on planet Zog with the sentient squirrels. Sitchin's theories are built upon his translations and interpretations of Sumerian and other ancient texts. He saw references to celestial bodies, flight, advanced technologies, and genetic engineering woven into the mythological language. For instance, the epic creation poem Enuma Elish, which describes a cosmic battle between gods like Marduk and Tiamat, was reinterpreted by Sitchin as an account of planetary collisions in the early solar system, with Nibiru playing a key role in the formation of Earth and the asteroid belt. The gods were not allegorical figures, but literal planets and their personified inhabitants. It's a grand, sweeping vision, recasting our solar system's history and humanity's origins in an entirely new, extraterrestrial light. A mainstream historical fact that often gets pulled into these discussions is the sophisticated astronomical knowledge possessed by ancient Mesopotamians. They developed complex calendars, could predict eclipses, and tracked the movements of planets with remarkable accuracy for their time, all without telescopes. They identified Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This proficiency is undeniable. Sitchin argued that this knowledge was too advanced for a primitive civilization and must have been a legacy from the Anunnaki, who naturally would have possessed superior astronomical understanding, especially if they were navigating interstellar space or a 3,600-year orbit. The counter-argument, of course, is that human ingenuity and centuries of patient observation are perfectly capable of achieving such astronomical insights. Now for a quirky, or perhaps more accurately, a highly controversial tidbit central to Sitchin's thesis, his identification of Nibiru as a specific, undiscovered 12th planet, counting the Sun, Moon, and the then-known planets, plus Nibiru itself, though the counting method can be a bit convoluted. This idea of a large, unseen planet in our solar system, often dubbed Planet X, predates Sitchin, but he firmly attached it to the Anunnaki narrative. Modern astronomy has found no conclusive evidence for such a massive planet on a 3,600-year orbit. While searches for distant planets in the Kuiper Belt and beyond are ongoing, like the hypothetical Planet 9, these are based on gravitational anomalies observed in the orbits of other distant objects, not on ancient Sumerian texts. The scientific community overwhelmingly rejects the existence of Nibiru as Sitchin described it. Despite this, the idea of Nibiru persists with almost religious fervor in certain circles, often linked to doomsday prophecies whenever a supposed return is predicted. It's become a kind of modern myth in its own right. The academic and scientific response to Sitchin's work has been almost universally critical. Scholars of Sumerian language, history, and archaeology have pointed out numerous alleged mistranslations, misinterpretations, and a tendency to take mythological narratives far too literally, often out of context. Historians still argue whether Sitchin's interpretations represent a genuine, albeit unconventional, attempt to decode ancient mysteries or a more deliberate construction of a sensational narrative by selectively reading and reframing the source material. The charge is often that he found what he was looking for, fitting the evidence to his pre-existing theory rather than deriving the theory from the evidence. Regardless of the academic consensus, Sitchin's books became bestsellers, and his ideas took deep root in popular consciousness. He provided a comprehensive, seemingly coherent, if you accept its premises, alternative history that addressed fundamental questions of human origins and our place in the cosmos. For many, the idea of being genetically engineered by advanced aliens from a planet called Nibiru was a far more exciting and, in some ways, more empowering origin story than traditional religious or purely evolutionary accounts. It made humanity special, chosen, a direct product of extraterrestrial intervention. You are no longer just a descendant of apes. You are a star child, albeit one designed for gold mining. So, as you ponder the Anunnaki, the name Nibiru will inevitably float through your mind. Is it a phantom planet, a figment of imaginative reinterpretation? Or is it a vital clue, a missing piece of the puzzle that could rewrite everything we think we know about our past? The allure of a hidden history, of advanced beings secretly guiding our destiny from a rogue planet, is undeniably potent. Whether you see Sitchin as a visionary decoder of ancient secrets or a master of speculative fiction, his introduction of Nibiru onto the cosmic stage has ensured that the Anunnaki story will forever be debated not just in terms of gods or myths, but as a potential chapter in a forgotten extraterrestrial saga, beyond the grand narratives of their arrival, their planetary engineering projects, and their specific need for gold from a hypothetical 12th planet. What do the Anunnaki actually look like? If these were indeed flesh and blood beings interacting with early humans, as some theories propose, then descriptions of their physical appearance would be crucial. Ancient texts and artistic depictions, while often symbolic and open to interpretation, do offer some tantalizing, if sometimes contradictory clues. And these clues have certainly fueled speculation that the Anunnaki were not entirely human, or at least not like the humans you see around you every day. As you examine the cylinder seals, those small, intricately carved stone cylinders that the Sumerians rolled onto wet clay to create a repeating impression, you see figures of gods and goddesses. These divine beings are often depicted as larger than the humans around them, a common artistic convention to denote importance, but one that ancient astronaut theorists often take more literally. Were the Anunnaki giants? The texts sometimes use terms that can be translated as shining ones or bright ones, which could refer to their majestic aura, their radiant garments, or more speculatively, perhaps even the nature of their skin or technology. You might see them wearing distinctive horn headdresses, a clear marker of divinity in Mesopotamian art. The more horns, often up to 7 pairs, the more important the deity. Were these purely symbolic, or did they serve some other function, perhaps as part of a helmet or a life support system? The descriptions in the texts themselves can be equally evocative and ambiguous. They're often described with words that emphasize their power, their fearsomeness, their brilliance. Terms like Malamu or Pulgishtu in Akkadian refer to a divine radiance or terrifying aura that surrounds the gods, an overwhelming luminosity that could inspire awe or dread in mortals. Imagine encountering a being that literally shimmered with power, whose very presence felt like a physical force. It would certainly make an impression. One can almost feel the heat and light pressing against your skin as one of these beings approaches. Don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact. You be whispering to yourself, while simultaneously being unable to look away. Some of the more specific, and often cited, descriptions that lead to theories of non-human appearance come from interpretations that link the Anunnaki to later biblical narratives, particularly those involving the Nephilim. The book of Genesis, chapter 6, famously speaks of sons of God interbreeding with daughters of men, producing mighty men who were of old, men of renown, the Nephilim, often translated as giants. If the sons of God are equated with the Anunnaki, then their offspring with humans were giants. This, by extension, implies that the Anunnaki themselves might have been of imposing stature. The idea of giant skeletons being found around the world is a persistent theme in fringe archaeology, often presented as suppressed evidence of these beings, though mainstream science has found no credible proof for such claims. Still, the image of towering, powerful beings walking among early humans is a potent one. A mainstream historical fact that provides context here is that ancient Near Eastern art, including Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian, had well-established conventions for depicting gods and rulers. Deities were often shown with specific attributes, symbols, animals, or attire that identified them. For example, Ishtar/Inanna is often shown with lion imagery and weapons, while Enki/Ea might be depicted with flowing streams of water, sometimes containing fish, emerging from his shoulders. These are generally understood as symbolic representations of their powers and domains, not necessarily literal physical characteristics. So, when a god is shown with water flowing from him, it doesn't mean he was literally leaking. Probably. Unless, it was a particularly hot day and the divine air conditioning was on the fritz. Now for a quirky and again, highly speculative tidbit that often comes up in discussions about the Anunnaki's appearance, reptilian features. Some more extreme theories, popularized by authors like David Icke, suggest that the Anunnaki, or at least a faction of them, were reptilian humanoids. This is largely based on very selective interpretations of certain artistic motifs, like scaly patterns on some divine garments which are more commonly interpreted as feathers or elaborate weaving, and a Gnostic text describing the Archon creator as having the form of a draken or serpent. This reptilian Anunnaki idea has taken on a life of its own, often intertwined with modern conspiracy theories about shape-shifting reptilian elites controlling the world. While this is far removed from Sitchin's original giant humanoid astronaut model and has very little basis in mainstream Mesopotamian scholarship, it's a significant, if lurid, branch of the Anunnaki legendarium. It does make you wonder about the practicalities, though. Would a reptilian Anunnaki need a heat lamp in their ziggurat temple? And would they shed their skin? So many questions. Other features sometimes attributed to the Anunnaki based on textual interpretations include long lifespans, far exceeding those of humans. The Sumerian king list, for instance, attributes incredibly long reigns, thousands or even tens of thousands of years, to the kings who ruled before the flood, kings who were perhaps Anunnaki themselves or directly appointed by them. While these are usually understood as mythological numbers symbolizing immense antiquity or divine status, some take them as literal indications of extended Anunnaki lifespans, perhaps a result of their advanced biology or technology from Nibiru. Historians still argue whether the depictions of hybrid beings in Mesopotamian art, such as bullmen, kuzuriku, or lion-headed eagles and zoo bird, have any connection to the Anunnaki's original form or their alleged genetic experiments, or if they are purely symbolic representations of spirits, demons, or guardians associated with the gods. These composite creatures are certainly striking, but linking them directly to Anunnaki morphology is a significant interpretive leap. So, as you try to form a mental image of these gods, you're faced with a mosaic of possibilities. Are they simply larger-than-life humans, radiating an almost unbearable divine glory? Are they towering giants, the sons of God from biblical lore? Or are they something even more alien, with features subtly or overtly different from our own, perhaps related to reptilian forms, or other biological types entirely unknown to us? The texts and artifacts provide tantalizing glimpses, but no definitive photograph. The Anunnaki remain shrouded in their malamu, their divine radiance, their true forms perhaps intentionally obscured or simply lost to the symbolic language of ancient art and myth. This ambiguity, of course, only makes them more fascinating, allowing each generation to imagine them anew. As you continue to sift through the layers of myth and legend surrounding the Anunnaki, a compelling question arises. If these powerful beings, whether gods, angels, or ancient aliens, were so influential in Mesopotamia, did their presence leave echoes in other cultures across the ancient world? The idea that similar divine beings or sky god narratives appear in disparate, geographically separated civilizations is a fascinating one, and it's a cornerstone of many alternative history theories. Are these parallels mere coincidence, the result of universal human archetypes and similar responses to natural phenomena? Or could they point to a shared ancient source, a global interaction with the same group of celestial visitors? You start to look beyond the Fertile Crescent, casting your gaze across oceans and continents. In ancient Egypt, a civilization that rose around the same time as Sumer, you find a complex pantheon ruled by sky gods like Ra, the sun god who traversed the heavens in his solar bark, and Osiris, the god of the afterlife, whose story involves dismemberment and resurrection, themes with distant parallels in some Mesopotamian myths concerning Dumuzi/Tammuz. Egyptian gods were also depicted as powerful beings, often with animal heads, who interacted directly with humanity, gave laws, and founded dynasties. The concept of divine kingship was central, with pharaohs considered gods on earth, much like the Sumerian kings ruled by divine mandate. Was the Egyptian Ra just another name or aspect of the Anunnaki Anu, or Utu/Shamash? The linguistic connections are tenuous at best, but the thematic similarities in divine hierarchies and roles are certainly there. Then you travel, in your mind's eye, to the Indus Valley Civilization, another contemporary ancient powerhouse. While their script remains largely undeciphered, the seals and artifacts depict figures that have been interpreted as Proto-Shiva or Mother Goddesses, hinting at a sophisticated religious system. Could their deities also share a common ancestor with the Anunnaki? The lack of deciphered texts makes direct comparisons difficult. But the very presence of advanced urban societies with complex belief systems appearing around the same time frame in different parts of the world fuels the speculation of a shared catalyst. Imagine these early civilizations as different regional offices of a global Anunnaki corporation, each with its local divine managers, but all ultimately reporting to the same celestial headquarters. A bit of a stretch, perhaps, but a fun thought experiment. Across the Atlantic, in Mesoamerica, civilizations like the Maya, Aztec, and Inca developed complex mythologies featuring powerful sky gods, feathered serpents like Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, and stories of creator deities who shaped humanity. Quetzalcoatl, for instance, was a bringer of knowledge, associated with learning, agriculture, and the arts, somewhat like Enki. He was also said to have departed, promising to return, a theme that resonates with the eventual departure of the Anunnaki in some narratives. Could these Mesoamerican gods be a distant, localized memory of the same beings who were active in Sumer? The vast distances and lack of direct contemporaneous contact make this a highly speculative leap for mainstream history, which generally favors independent development. However, for proponents of a global ancient astronaut intervention, these parallels are seen as strong evidence. Of course, Quetzalcoatl sounds like Enki. They might say they were probably colleagues. A mainstream historical fact that plays into this is the concept of cultural diffusion versus independent invention. It's a long-standing debate in anthropology and archaeology. When similar cultural traits like pyramid building, flood myths, or specific deity archetypes appear in different, unconnected societies, did one society learn it from another diffusion, or did they come up with it on their own independent invention? For instance, pyramid-like structures are found in Mesopotamia, ziggurats, Egypt, and Mesoamerica. While their forms and specific functions differed, the monumental effort to build artificial mountains reaching toward the sky is a striking parallel. Mainstream scholarship often points to the independent development of these structures, serving different local religious and social needs. Alternative theories, however, suggest a shared blueprint, a legacy of the Anunnaki building style. Now for a quirky or perhaps synchronistic tidbit, the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa. Their traditional beliefs, first extensively documented by French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen in the mid-20th century, include astonishingly detailed astronomical knowledge, particularly about the Sirius star system. They speak of Sirius B, a dwarf star invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed by modern astronomers in the 19th century, and even describe its elliptical orbit and density. They also mention a third star, Sirius C, whose existence is still debated by astronomers. The Dogon attribute this knowledge to the Namo, amphibious beings who came from the Sirius system in a vessel, bringing civilization to Earth. While the Anunnaki are typically associated with Nibiru, not Sirius, the narrative of advanced beings from the sky sharing knowledge with humanity is a powerful parallel. Could the Namo be another regional manifestation or allied group of the Anunnaki? Or, as some skeptics suggest, was the Dogon knowledge perhaps contaminated by contact with knowledgeable Westerners prior to Griaule's intensive studies? The debate is fierce and fascinating. It makes you wonder if the Anunnaki had different species or allied races in their cosmic federation. The Nibiruans will handle Mesopotamia. The Syrians can take West Africa. Don't mix up the paperwork. Historians still argue whether the striking similarities in certain foundational myths across cultures, creation from clay, global floods, divine tricksters, warring sky gods, are evidence of a shared historical experience, like a visit from the Anunnaki or a common ancestral myth from a proto-civilization, or if they simply reflect universal human psychological structures and common environmental challenges that lead to similar symbolic expressions. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and archetypes offers one way to understand these parallels without resorting to extraterrestrial intervention. Perhaps the Anunnaki are less about specific beings and more about a particular archetypal pattern of powerful sky father or wise creator god that emerges naturally in the human psyche. So, as you look at the world map of ancient civilizations, the Anunnaki story begins to ripple outwards from Mesopotamia. Are these ripples genuine echoes of their global presence, or are they more like a cultural Rorschach test, where we see patterns based on our own desire for a grand, unified theory of the past? The similarities are tantalizing. The feathered serpent gods of Central America, the Wizoans, a fishman deity said to have taught wisdom to the Babylonians, often linked to Enki. The sky gods of the Vedic texts in India, like Indra wielding his thunderbolt Vajra, all seem to whisper of a shared heritage, a time when gods walked the earth and interacted with multiple fledgling human societies. Whether these were all Anunnaki under different aliases or different groups of gods, or simply the products of convergent human imagination, the echoes persist, inviting you to listen closely to the ancient stories from every corner of the globe. After an epoch of direct intervention, creating humanity, assigning them toil, surviving a great flood, establishing laws and cities, and perhaps even managing interstellar mining operations, what happens to the Anunnaki? Do these powerful beings, who so profoundly shaped the destiny of early human civilization, simply stick around forever, micromanaging mortal affairs? The ancient texts, while not providing a single neat departure date, do suggest a gradual fading of their overt presence, a withdrawal from the earthly stage, leaving humanity to navigate its own future, albeit within the framework they established. This departure, like their arrival, is shrouded in layers of myth and interpretation, but it marks a crucial turning point in the human story. Imagine a time when the direct, physical manifestations of the Anunnaki become less frequent. The ziggurats, once perhaps bustling with divine comings and goings, if you subscribe to the more literal interpretations, now see only human priests performing rituals in their name. The kings, who once might have received counsel directly from a deity, now rely more on omens, divination, and the accumulated wisdom of priestly tradition to discern the divine will. It's not necessarily a sudden disappearance, a mass exodus in a fleet of golden spaceships, though that would make for a dramatic exit. It's more like a slow fade, a transition from direct rule to a more remote form of oversight, or perhaps even a complete handover of terrestrial affairs. You can almost feel the shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change from a world where gods walked among men to a world where they are primarily worshipped in temples and remembered in epic tales. The divine phone line, once a direct dial, now seems to have more static, more dropped calls. Why would they leave? The reasons offered, both within traditional mythology and modern theories, vary. From a mythological perspective, perhaps their work on Earth was considered complete. They had set up civilization, given humanity the tools it needed, the laws, kingship, and now it was time for humans to stand on their own 2 feet, to mature as a species. Or perhaps, as Sitchin's narrative suggests, the gold mining operation reached its target or became unsustainable, or their home planet Nibiru's long orbital path simply carried them too far away from Earth for convenient commuting. Maybe they just got tired of all the human drama. Honestly, Anu, I've had it with these mortals. Their prayers are incessant, their sacrifices are often subpar, and they still can't figure out how to use the turn signals on their chariots. Let's go home. Some texts hint at divine retirements or gods ascending permanently to the heavens. Anu, the supreme sky god, was always somewhat remote. Enlil, after the flood and re-establishing order, might have delegated more earthly responsibilities to local deities or human rulers. Enki, humanity's steadfast, if sometimes mischievous friend, might have ensured that humanity was sufficiently equipped before taking a more hands-off approach. The departure could also have been linked to internal Anunnaki politics or conflicts we are not fully privy to. Perhaps there were disagreements about the Earth project, or new priorities arose elsewhere in their cosmic domain. A mainstream historical fact that aligns with this idea of a shift in divine presence is the gradual humanization and localization of deities in many cultures over time. While early gods might be vast cosmic forces, later periods often see them with more human-like personalities, family squabbles, and specific regional patronages. This could be interpreted as humanity filling the void left by more remote or departed great gods, adapting the divine narrative to more immediate, relatable concerns. The focus shifts from the grand Anunnaki council to the patron god of your city, the one who might actually intervene if your crops fail, because their temple is right down the street. Now for a quirky, or rather poignant, tidbit from Mesopotamian belief, the concept of a god abandoning their city. It was a common explanation for why a city might fall to invaders or suffer a catastrophe. If the city's patron deity withdrew their favor and protection, disaster was sure to follow. This wasn't necessarily the god physically packing their divine bags and leaving, but more withdrawal of their protective influence. However, in the context of a more literal Anunnaki presence, the idea of a god physically departing, taking their malamu or divine radiance with them, leaving the city vulnerable, takes on a more concrete meaning. You can imagine the despair of the inhabitants, seeing the signs that their divine protector was no longer in residence. The temple grows cold, the omens turn sour. The departure of the gods is a recurring theme in many mythologies worldwide, not just in Mesopotamia. The Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl sails away on a raft of serpents, promising to return. The Irish Tuatha Danann, godlike beings with advanced skills, retreat into the other world or into Sidhe mounts. This motif of a golden age when gods and humans interacted closely, followed by withdrawal of the divine and a subsequent decline or struggle for humanity, is quite common. It begs the question, was this a coordinated global departure or simply a shared mythological trope reflecting a universal human nostalgia for a more magical, divinely guided past? Historians still argue whether the accounts of gods leaving or ascending are purely metaphorical, representing a shift in religious consciousness from immanent deities to more transcendent ones, or if they could be garbled memories of a time when actual, tangible interactions with powerful beings ceased. If the Anunnaki were indeed extraterrestrial visitors, their departure would be a literal event, ships lifting off, leaving humanity to its own devices. If they were gods in a more traditional sense, their departure might be a more subtle shift in the perceived veil between the human and divine realms. So you find yourself in a world where the direct, tangible presence of the Anunnaki is waning. The stories of their deeds are still told, their laws are still followed, mostly, and their temples are still maintained. But the feeling is different. Humanity is now the primary actor on the world stage. The training wheels are off. This doesn't mean the divine influence is gone entirely. The cosmos is still seen as governed by divine principles, and the expectation of divine intervention or judgment persists. But the day-to-day, hands-on management by the Anunnaki seems to be over. Humanity is left with their legacy, a complex inheritance of knowledge, societal structures, a specific and perhaps flawed genetic makeup, and a deep-seated memory of a time when giants or shining ones or beings from the sky walked the earth and called the shots. The silence they leave behind is filled with human endeavor, human conflict, and the enduring human quest to understand its own destiny, now seemingly in its own hands. But the question always lingers, will they ever return? The departure of the Anunnaki, whether a literal withdrawal of extraterrestrial beings or a metaphorical shift in religious consciousness, leaves a profound void and a lingering question that echoes down through millennia. Were these stories of sky gods, divine interventions, and celestial battles actual, garbled accounts of ancient astronauts visiting Earth? Or are they purely the products of human imagination, powerful myths created to explain the inexplicable, to give order to a chaotic world, and to legitimize social structures? This is the heart of the chariots or stories debate, a debate that pits literal interpretations of ancient texts against more conventional mythological and psychological explanations. You find yourself standing at this crossroads of interpretation, trying to make sense of the enduring legacy of the Anunnaki. On one side, you have the proponents of the ancient astronaut theory, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken, whose book Chariots of the Gods gave the debate its catchy name, and, of course, Zacharias Sitchin, whom we've already discussed. They argue that ancient myths and religious texts from around the world, including the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, are not just allegories or primitive superstitions. Instead, they are eyewitness accounts, or at least distorted memories, of encounters with technologically advanced extraterrestrial visitors. These visitors, the Anunnaki in the Mesopotamian context, were mistaken for gods by early humans who lacked the framework to understand concepts like spacecraft, advanced weaponry, or genetic engineering. So a spaceship becomes a celestial chariot or a skyboat, a laser weapon becomes a thunderbolt, and genetic manipulation becomes creating humans from clay mixed with divine blood. It's a seductive idea. Our ancestors weren't just imagining things. They were recording real, albeit misunderstood, events. You can almost see von Däniken, with his characteristic enthusiasm, pointing to a vague depiction on a temple wall and exclaiming, "You see, a rocket ship." Clearly, this perspective suggests that humanity's sudden leaps in knowledge and civilization, the rapid development of agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and monumental architecture in places like Sumer, cannot be adequately explained by conventional evolutionary models. There must have been an external catalyst, a helping hand from more advanced beings. The Anunnaki, in this view, were the teachers, the civilizers, perhaps even our creators or genetic modifiers. The ziggurats weren't just symbolic mountains. They were actual launch pads or beacons. The Tablet of Destinies wasn't just a mythical artifact. It might have been a sophisticated computer or data storage device containing the programs for civilization. The argument often relies on pointing out perceived anomalies in the archaeological record or technological sophistication that seems out of place for its time. On the other side of the debate, you have the overwhelming consensus of mainstream historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and scholars of mythology. They argue that the ancient astronaut theory is built on a foundation of misinterpretation, selective evidence, and a fundamental underestimation of the capabilities and creativity of ancient human societies. They contend that myths are complex symbolic narratives that serve multiple functions, explaining natural phenomena like storms or the movement of celestial bodies, validating social and political structures like divine kingship, exploring fundamental human concerns like life, death, and morality, and providing a sense of shared identity and purpose. The gods are personifications of natural forces, psychological archetypes, or deified ancestors, not literal visitors from other planets. Humanity's technological and cultural achievements, while impressive, can be explained through gradual development, innovation, and the diffusion of ideas between human cultures, without recourse to extraterrestrial intervention. They might gently suggest that seeing a rocket in every vaguely conical carving is a bit like seeing faces in clouds, a product of pareidolia. A mainstream historical fact that supports this view is the clear evolution of religious ideas and artistic conventions within specific cultures. For example, the depiction of gods in Sumerian art changes over time, reflecting evolving theological concepts and artistic styles, not necessarily changing alien fashions. Furthermore, the mythological narratives themselves often show internal inconsistencies or multiple versions, characteristic of orally transmitted stories that are adapted and reinterpreted by different scribes and communities over centuries. This fluidity is more indicative of myth-making than of recording precise historical events involving aliens. Now for a quirky yet illustrative tidbit that often gets caught in the crossfire of this debate, the story of the Tower of Babel. From a traditional religious or mythological standpoint, it's a tale of human hubris, an attempt to reach God, leading to divine punishment and the confusion of languages. For ancient astronaut theorists, as we touched upon, it's often interpreted as humanity trying to build its own Shem or sky vehicle, a forbidden technology that the Anunnaki/Elohim suppressed by confusing their language, perhaps by wiping their shared technical database or by scattering the project leaders. It highlights how the same story can be read in dramatically different ways depending on your interpretive lens. One person sees a cautionary tale about pride. Another sees a suppressed attempt at space travel. It's like a cosmic who's on first, routine, but with planetary implications. Historians still argue about the precise origins and meanings of many specific mythological motifs. For example, the widespread dying and rising god archetype like Dumusid/Tammuz in Mesopotamia, Osiris in Egypt, or Adonis in Greece, often linked to agricultural cycles of death and rebirth, is seen by some ancient astronaut theorists as a possible, distorted memory of an Anunnaki figure who was killed and then revived using advanced medical technology, or perhaps a crew member put into suspended animation and later reawakened. The mythological explanation sees it as a powerful metaphor for natural cycles, while the extraterrestrial one sees a literal, albeit misunderstood, technological event. So where do you stand? Are you convinced by the arguments for ancient alien intervention, seeing the Anunnaki as literal beings who came from the stars to shape our destiny? Or do you find the explanations from mythology, psychology, and conventional history more compelling, viewing the Anunnaki as powerful symbols, archetypes, or personified forces of nature born from the rich soil of human imagination? The debate is far from settled, at least in the public sphere. The allure of chariots is strong. It offers a sense of cosmic connection, a feeling that we are not alone, and that our past is far stranger and more exciting than the history books might suggest. But the power of stories is equally profound. Myths have shaped human consciousness for millennia, providing meaning, comfort, and a framework for understanding our place in the universe, regardless of their literal truth. Perhaps, in the end, the most important thing is not whether the Anunnaki were real aliens or powerful metaphors, but what their enduring story tells us about ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our creativity, and our eternal fascination with the great unknown. Though the ziggurats have long since crumbled into dusty mounds, and the cuneiform tablets mostly reside in museum collections, the Anunnaki themselves are far from forgotten. In fact, you could say they're experiencing something of a renaissance in the modern era. Their story, or at least certain interpretations of it, has broken free from the confines of academic journals and ancient history lectures and found vibrant, often controversial, new life in popular culture, fringe theories, and even new religious movements. As you navigate the digital landscape of the 21st century, you'll find the Anunnaki popping up in some surprising and occasionally alarming places. The groundwork for this modern revival was laid, as we've discussed, by authors like Zacharias Sitchin and Eric von Daniken. Their books, starting from the mid-20th century, translated, or as critics would say, mistranslated and reimagined, the ancient Sumerian narratives for a mass audience, stripping away much of the mythological context and presenting the Anunnaki as ancient astronauts who genetically engineered humanity and mined Earth for gold. This narrative, compelling and easily digestible, spread like wildfire, spawning countless documentaries, websites, online forums, and a dedicated following. You can almost picture the Anunnaki, if they were observing this from afar, either scratching their possibly horned heads in confusion, or perhaps hiring a celestial PR firm to manage their suddenly booming public image. Get Sitchin on the line. We need to discuss royalties for the Nibiru merchandise. This ancient astronaut interpretation has become a staple of certain television channels that specialize in historical mysteries and alternative theories. Shows with dramatic music and speculative narration repeatedly pose questions like, could ancient man have achieved this without alien help? The Anunnaki are often presented as prime candidates for this help. Their alleged technological prowess used to explain everything from the construction of the pyramids to the intricacies of ancient astronomical knowledge. While often criticized by mainstream academics for presenting speculation as fact, these shows have undeniably brought the Anunnaki to a far wider audience than ever before, embedding their names and narratives into the popular imagination. Beyond general ancient astronaut enthusiasm, the Anunnaki have also become central figures in various modern conspiracy theories. Some of these theories build directly on Sitchin's work, focusing on the supposed imminent return of Nibiru and the Anunnaki, often linked to doomsday prophecies and predictions of global upheaval. Others take a darker turn, weaving the Anunnaki into narratives about secret cabals controlling the world, sometimes linking them with other shadowy groups like the Illuminati or, as we touched upon, with reptilian aliens who supposedly walk among us in disguise. In these narratives, the Anunnaki are not just ancient visitors but ongoing, hidden puppet masters manipulating human society for their own nefarious purposes. It's a far cry from the wise, if sometimes stern deities of Sumerian myth, transforming them into villains for a modern, paranoid age. You might even find online communities dedicated to resisting these hidden Anunnaki overlords, a strange echo of humanity's ancient attempts to appease powerful, unseen forces. A mainstream historical fact that provides an interesting parallel here is the phenomenon of syncretism in religion, where different beliefs and practices are blended together. Just as ancient cultures often merge their local deities with those of conquering or influential neighbors, modern Anunnaki beliefs often syncretize elements from Sumerian mythology, Sitchin's theories, ufology, New Age spirituality, and various conspiracy theories into a unique and often internally inconsistent modern mythos. It's a testament to the human tendency to weave disparate threads into a cohesive, or at least compelling, narrative. Now for a quirky and somewhat niche tidbit regarding the Anunnaki's modern revival, their appearance in contemporary art and music. From heavy metal bands writing concept albums about Nibiru to digital artists creating stunning, futuristic renderings of Anunnaki gods in their imagined spacecraft, the aesthetic and narrative potential of these ancient beings continues to inspire creativity. They become archetypes not just for ancient astronaut theorists, but for anyone looking for powerful, enigmatic figures to populate their fictional worlds. There's even a subgenre of Anunnaki trance music, which aims to create an atmosphere of cosmic mystery and ancient power. It's probably not what the Sumerians had in mind when they were composing hymns to Enlil, but it shows the enduring adaptability of these ancient figures. One wonders if Enki, as the god of arts and crafts, would approve of the new synth solos in his honor. Furthermore, the Anunnaki have been incorporated into the belief systems of some New Age and neo-pagan groups. For some, they are seen as powerful spiritual guides, ancient teachers whose wisdom can be accessed through meditation or channeling. Others might view them as a specific starseed lineage, with certain humans believing they have Anunnaki souls or DNA, destined to play a role in Earth's spiritual evolution. This reinterpretation casts them not as physical extraterrestrials in the Sitchin sense, nor as purely mythological figures, but as transdimensional beings or spiritual entities within a broader esoteric cosmology. Historians and sociologists still argue about what the modern fascination with figures like the Anunnaki signifies. Is it a symptom of a decline in traditional religious belief, leading people to seek alternative spiritual or historical narratives? Is it a reflection of anxieties about rapid technological change and a sense of powerlessness in a complex world, leading to a desire for powerful external saviors or scapegoats? Or is it simply a testament to the enduring human love for a good story, especially one that combines ancient mystery, cosmic grandeur, and the tantalizing possibility that we are not alone? Whatever the reasons, it's clear that the Anunnaki are not just ancient history. They are alive and well in the 21st century, debated on podcasts, depicted in video games, invoked in spiritual ceremonies, and feared in conspiracy theories. Their story continues to evolve, shaped and reshaped by each new generation that encounters them. You, as a listener delving into their lore, are now part of this ongoing process of reinterpretation. The ancient Sumerians looked to the skies and saw the Anunnaki as powerful gods who shaped their world. Today, we look back at the Sumerians and at those same skies and continue to ask, who or what were they really? And what does their enduring presence in our modern imagination tell us about ourselves? And so, here we are, at the end of our long, winding journey through the sands of time, through the whispers of ancient Sumer, and into the often bewildering landscape of modern interpretations. We've walked with you as the Anunnaki descended, as humanity was fashioned from clay, as gold was allegedly mined for a distant world, and as divine brothers clashed over your very existence. We've seen civilizations rise under their supposed guidance, ziggurats reach for their celestial chariots, and then a gradual fading as they departed, leaving you to ponder the silence. The question that has hung in the warm Mesopotamian air throughout our exploration remains: were the Anunnaki gods, angels, ancient aliens, or something else entirely, perhaps a powerful, enduring metaphor? The final verdict, as you might expect, is still very much pending, likely to remain so, debated in quiet university halls and shouted from the digital rooftops of the internet for years to come. If you lean towards gods in the traditional mythological sense, you see the Anunnaki as the products of a sophisticated religious imagination, born from humanity's attempt to make sense of a wondrous and terrifying world. They are personifications of natural forces, the storm, the sun, the life-giving waters, and embodiments of societal principles like kingship, justice, and wisdom. Their stories are rich allegories, exploring the human condition, the nature of power, and our relationship with the cosmos. The cuneiform tablets, in this view, are sacred literature, profound works of poetry and theological speculation, not garbled historical accounts of extraterrestrial encounters. The Anunnaki are powerful because they represent timeless truths about ourselves and the universe, their reality residing in their symbolic weight and their influence on human culture and belief for millennia. You might feel a sense of awe at the sheer depth and complexity of this ancient Mesopotamian worldview, a testament to human creativity and spiritual yearning. If you consider them angels or similar divine messengers, perhaps you see them through a lens influenced by later Abrahamic traditions, or as spiritual intermediaries between a higher, ultimate creator and humanity. In this light, they are not the ultimate source of divinity themselves, but powerful emissaries, carrying out a divine plan, sometimes benevolent, sometimes sternly judgmental, as seen in the flood story. Their interactions with humanity are part of a larger cosmic drama, a divine unfolding of purpose. This perspective might allow for a more spiritual, less literal interpretation than the ancient astronaut theory, while still acknowledging a real, active presence of powerful, non-human entities in human history. You might find comfort in the idea of a structured, hierarchical cosmos, where even the most powerful beings serve a higher purpose. Then, of course, there's the compelling, controversial, and endlessly fascinating ancient aliens hypothesis. If this is where your conviction lies, you see the Anunnaki as flesh and blood extraterrestrials from a technologically advanced civilization, likely Nibiru, if you follow Sitchin's specific narrative. They came to Earth for resources, manipulated early hominid genetics to create Homo sapiens as a worker race, and their divine attributes were simply misinterpretations of their advanced technology. Their departure was a physical event, and their return is a possibility, perhaps even an inevitability. The ziggurats are launch pads, the myths are distorted historical records, and humanity's origins are inextricably tied to the stars in a very literal way. You might feel a sense of excitement at this prospect, a feeling that history is far stranger and more technologically advanced than we're commonly taught, and that humanity is part of a vast galactic community. It's a narrative that challenges conventional paradigms and offers a sense of cosmic significance, even if our initial role was cosmic laborer. That time we imagined Enlil complaining about the divine coffee machine? In this view, it was probably a very advanced nutrient paste dispenser, and he was just having a bad millennium dot, or perhaps you find the Anunnaki to be a powerful metaphor. They represent the other, the unknown, the forces beyond our control that shape human destiny. They could be a metaphor for the sudden leaps in human consciousness or technological innovation that seem to come from nowhere. They could symbolize the oppressive power structures that demand labor and sacrifice from masses. Their internal conflicts, like those between Enki and Enlil, could be metaphors for the eternal struggle between different human impulses, compassion versus control, rebellion versus conformity, wisdom versus dogma. In this light, their reality is not in their physical existence, but in their ability to reflect and articulate deep-seated human anxieties and aspirations. A mainstream historical fact that underscores the difficulty in reaching a final verdict is the very nature of ancient texts. They were not written with modern historical or scientific objectivity in mind. They were often created to serve religious, political, or didactic purposes. Their language is rich in symbolism and metaphor, and translating them accurately across vast cultural and linguistic divides is an immense challenge. What seems like a literal description to one reader might be a clear allegory to another, and for one last quirky tidbit, the Anunnaki, in some very modern, almost playful reinterpretations, have even been blamed for things like bad traffic or slow internet connections, a tongue-in-cheek extension of their role as cosmic meddlers. It shows how these ancient figures can be adapted and reappropriated for almost any purpose, becoming a kind of all-purpose explanation for the inexplicable or simply a good punchline. My Wi-Fi is down again. Curse you, Enlil, and your atmospheric interference. Ultimately, historians will continue to debate the nuances of Sumerian grammar and the archaeological context of Eridu and Uruk. Scientists will continue to scan the skies for unknown planets and listen for signals from distant civilizations. And you, as you drift off to sleep, are left with these stories, these possibilities. Were they the gods who thundered from the mountaintops of our ancestors' imaginations? Were they celestial messengers, charting a course for humanity? Were they travelers from another star, their faces illuminated by the glow of their control panels? Or are they a mirror? Spaces between these interpretations, or in a synthesis of them that we have yet to fully grasp. The Anunnaki, in their multifaceted mystery, continue to challenge us, to inspire us, and to remind us that the past is never truly dead. It whispers to us from ancient clay, from crumbling ruins, and from the enduring power of stories that have outlasted empires. The verdict is yours to ponder, as the stars will overhead, just as they did for those first skywatchers in ancient Sumer. As the echoes of these ancient tales begin to soften, as the figures of gods and aliens recede into the mists of your imagination, allow your mind to find a place of quiet repose. The grand questions of our origins, of who or what might have shaped our distant past, can be set aside for now, nestled gently into the tapestry of stories that humanity has woven throughout its long journey. These narratives, whether you find them to be literal truth, powerful metaphor, or fascinating fiction, have served their purpose for tonight to transport you, to engage your curiosity, and to accompany you as you prepare for rest. Let the weight of millennia, the dust of ancient lands, and the shimmer of distant stars now become a soft blanket, easing you into a peaceful slumber. The mysteries will still be there tomorrow, waiting patiently, but for now, all that matters is the gentle rhythm of your breath and the quiet sanctuary of your dreams. And all the others together with them took unto them wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go into them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant. And they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. And then the earth laid accusations against the lawless ones. And then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. These insurgents also passed on knowledge and taught them combat and how to make weapons. And Asel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and all color and tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. Samaya taught enchantments and root cutings. Barakiel taught astrology, talked about the constellations. Isakiel the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel the signs of the earth. Shamshiel the signs of the sun. And Sariel the course of the moon. And as men perished they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. And all this was seen as a violation against a set of laws laid down by the Shining Ones who were possessive of their knowledge. Thou seest that as Azel hath done, you hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Samiza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates, and they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sins, and the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. Enoch, the scribe who was taught by the Shining Ones, was then employed as a messenger or intermediary between the Shining Ones and these fallen ones who had decided to abandon their divinity to live amongst the tribes of man. Enoch was then sent to tell the insurgents that a severe sentence had been passed on them, and that they were soon to be punished. In brief, the punishment sent is the flood. It is as if the Shining Ones wanted to wash away the sins of the earth that had been created by their own kind, the fallen ones. In the Bible, we are told that God, or rather the gods known as Elohim, spoke to Noah, telling him that the seasons of summer and winter would be more extreme from the time of the flood onward. This both supports and is supported in turn by the book of Enoch, which states how in those days Noah saw that the earth had sunk down, and that destruction was nigh, and he said, Tell me what is transacting upon the earth, for the earth labors and is violently shaking. In the King James Version of the Bible, we find this. Behold, the Lord mocketh the earth empty, and mocketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. In Psalm 68 verse 8 it is written, The earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God, and even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God. The heavens dropping would mean that to the observers in the Sinai region, the earth beneath their feet was tipping relatively upward and northward. In his written book, Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes an awful catastrophe in which the earth moved forwards and backwards, and again to right and left and upwards and downwards, wandering every way in all 6 directions. But as many scholars and researchers have now acknowledged, the God of the Bible and his angels are said to be the Sumerian Anu and his sons and entourage, the Anunnaki or Shining Ones, who are reported to have landed in Mesopotamia and there created the Garden of Eden. And so we must now draw our conclusion. When we first started out in this task of discovering the Anunnaki, we found a complex and mystifying series of tales that seemed to make little sense. Slowly, we have pulled apart the names, places, and myths to reveal something very simple. Many thousands of years ago, something catastrophic occurred and a highly knowledgeable and wise people fled. They eventually landed somewhere in Mesopotamia, where they came across a less developed people. Civilization emerged as the new people taught their new people how to build mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and much more. Their wisdom was so great that later generations would call them gods and angels. They had descended from the shining, heavenly host. But division set in as the two cultures bred and made the bloodline less pure. The Watchers who had gone bad and the Shining Ones who were not happy in a simple tale that has become very complex over vast periods of time. In our age, it is being confused yet further by the addition of extraterrestrial origins for the Anunnaki.